if there is one single strongest build this patch, I think this is it. Pygmalien with bees, yo-yos, vineyards. You've seen it before. It's a new version of an older build, but man, I think this one might actually be stronger. This feels stronger than pretty much anything I've touched before, so let's jump into it. So here we are in the build tier list. Let's see how it ranks up, how it can do different things. As per usual, we're ranking its time to kill, its durability or sustainability, its replicatability, its late game potential, and its 10 wins in 10 days potential. Time to kill, I mean, this build is interesting, right? Because our primary activator of our yo-yo, which is one of our main sources of damage, is the bee, which means our time to kill is about as fast as the enemy's time to kill, right? If they're firing really, really quickly, then we're also firing really, really quickly and hopefully doing a lot more with it. So I'm going to put it in S tier because it can go up against a Vanessa dagger build and win. It can do what she's doing back to her, but better. Because we have lifesteal in a sense. And because of that, I'm also going to put its sustainability in... I'm not sure if it's quite S. I think there are more sustaining, more survivable tanky builds. I'm going to put it in A. And this is because of how Vineyard works. With Vineyard, every time you activate an item, you heal. We're putting a lot of emphasis on scaling our Vineyard. Which means... And you can run this not just with Vineyard as well. You can run this with Landscraper. Similar idea, right? Point being, you use one of Pygmalien's or Fort, one of Pygmalien's many items that give you some form of tankiness or defense whenever you activate an item. And we're activating an item every time the enemy activates an item, i.e. our bees, which means we're activating 2 items every time the enemy activates an item, because our yo-yo is next to our bees, and we're also using the washy bird in this version as well. So lots of activations, lots of tankability, but maybe there are tankier builds out there. Replicatability, I think I'm going to put it in B, maybe A. You can run a sort of yo-yo B at home as a replicatable A. But for the full sort of Exodia type thing, we're going to go with B. You do need a lot of pieces to come together. And while there are lots of versions that you can run, i.e. Fort, Vineyard, Landscraper, right? You don't have to run weights. You can run another property in that spot if you wanted to. There are a bunch of different things you could run in that spot. But the full combo, the full Exodia, is a little bit of a forced build. That being said, they are very easy to find items. Maybe I've talked myself down to a C. I'm going to put it at B for now. And this is because I'm going to take this as a wide view of the Bazaar overall time. And I think give the Bazaar another 3-6 months and this easily becomes a C, if not an NA. And they make builds a lot harder to reproduce. But at the moment, with how easy builds are to reproduce, even this one is a B. And then late game and 10 out of 10. Late game, I think this would fall off. But I don't think it's going to fall off that hard. I still think this is an A tier build late game. If you find the right skills, especially, you can really, really start to pop off. I'm thinking like Landscraper with sharp corners, right? Your build just exponentially increases in damage. Or a shielded Vineyard with sharp corners. Same premise there. And that's just my go-to off the top of my head. Sharp corners is just such a bloated OP skill. So its late game potential is there, but its 10 in 10 is also nuts. 10 in 10, like, you're a Pygmalion, so winning your first day isn't too difficult, right? There are some Vanessa builds that will beat you. You're not going to be running the full combo for the first couple of days. You are going to need something else just to tide you over. But Pygmalion has so many strong early game options. And if you get weights or yo-yo or any of these, or the bird or any of these key items at silver tier, especially weights. If you get weights at silver tier, you are going easy 10 out of 10. Because the bird, I've done entire runs of the Bazaar trying not to pick the bird, and it gives me the bird all the time. So yeah, you'll just accidentally find the bird find yourself a vineyard and then silver weights. You can easily make it diamond at this current version of the Bazaar. Yeah, this build, very easy, 10 out of 10. Let's actually get into a deep dive on the build. So here is our build. My version of it was vineyards, beehive, weights, busy bee, yo-yo, and washy bird, or whatever it's called. The bird, as we all know it. And then a plethora of good skills. As per usual, let me go over the core pieces of this build, that there basically aren't any spare slots. And then a couple of the key skills I picked up. In particular, one key skill. I think there are a lot of skills that you can use in this build, which is also what makes it very strong. So, first and foremost, I don't know which piece of this puzzle I want to say is the most key piece. It is probably the busy bee and therefore the beehive to start things off. So the beehive, when you purchase this, you get a busy bee. When it is on your board, every time your enemy uses an item, it activates a singular busy bee. And then whenever you buy a new property, you increase the damage of your busy bees by 5 and get a new busy bee. That is how beehive works. And then busy bee is just there doing damage every few seconds, but primarily you're relying on the beehive to trigger it every time an enemy uses an item. This was a recent buff. It used to be only weapons, so the beehive would trigger when the enemy uses a weapon. Now it's any item, because they fixed the bug, it was a bug, where all of the bees were activating. So now you only want one busy bee, and your beehive. Every time the enemy activates an item, the bee will trigger, which is fantastic for items like yo-yo and vineyard. So let's go into yo-yo next. Yo-yo every 8 seconds do a pitiful amount of damage, but every time you use an adjacent item, also use this. Yo-yo has kind of been pivotal to a lot of Pygmalion builds. The previous version of this in the last patch also utilized yo-yo next to the bird. Next to a busy bee though, this just sort of doubles your damage if you have any means at all of increasing the damage of bee and yo-yo, which are otherwise low damage items. That's kind of like the important part of the puzzle. And that's why this whole sort of Exodia type build comes together. That being said, as I say, there are lots of different ways you can increase the damage of these things. I specifically have 2 versions in this build. 3 really, but one of them is very, very late game. Okay, the next most important piece after our beehive, busy bee, and yo-yo is your choice of defensive item, right? We're using vineyard. I think vineyard is the best version of this build, but you can absolutely do it with landscraper, and if you have some means of increasing its shielding capability, fort is also acceptable. The vineyard, in this case, every hour it increases in value, and then whenever I use an item, it heals equal to its value. I also started with a leftmost healing item, which I stuck on my vineyard just to boost its healing early game, help me get to that 10 in 10, although we didn't get 10 in 10 because I threw one game, but we'll get to that. So every time our enemy uses an item, our busy bee and therefore our yo-yo will trigger, which means every time our enemy uses an item, in this particular case, I was healing for 386 times 2, basically close to 1,000, right? let's ballpark it and say I was basically healing for 1,000 every time the enemy used an item. So if you're an enemy player coming up against me, and you're not dealing more than 1,000 damage per activation of every one of your items, I am out healing you. There is nothing you can do. I'm just out healing you. That is where this build gets a little bit silly, because and just horridly consistent, because there are very, very few things that can outpace this. The only thing I can really think of would be sort of very, very, very hard hitting, low, like super long cooldown, low activation items, like the boulder, or perhaps a double whammy Pygmalion, right? And even then, we ran a different mode in this build. So if you really want to pop off, you have a backup, right? So beehive with busy bee, yo-yo, and vineyard, or yo-yo, or landscraper, or fort. Some sort of, when you use, give defense, right? That is the core of the build. But then I ran an even stronger variant. So we have the weights here. The weights, I think, could probably be another core item, and if anything, The weights are that key item I'm looking for early. Because you can do other things with weights, weights is just a very good item in general to run with the current way the Pygmalions play. So weights, every few seconds, it increases the damage of your damage items and the healing of your healing items. But when you heal at max health, so you heal and your heal is lost because you're already full health, it charges. So every time the enemy uses an item, assuming we're at full health because we're healing for like 1,000 every time, this instead just charges 2 seconds, which means this is then going to buff the healing of our vineyard and the damage of our weapons, which means the next time they do it, we're going to heal even harder, which means it's probably going to charge again, which means we're going to be healing even harder. And all the while, our damage items are dealing even more damage. Typically, this is your sort of core damage activator, and a lot of these Pygmalion builds rely on these weights, at least until later on in the game, to be the only source of damage for their B and their yo-yo. So it actually takes a little while for them to ramp up, but they're healing so much that they don't care. We specifically ran into a very lucky early encounter, which meant that we didn't need to worry about that, which I'll go over in a moment. But before I do, the last item we slotted was the bird. The bird, every 4 seconds, heals, and for each property you have, it has +1 multicast. We have 2 properties, Beehive as a property, as well as our vineyard, which means even if the enemy had 0 items, and they were just relying on being giga tanky, let's say they somehow rolled like 5 belts, and they just sat there with like 20,000 health. Every 4 seconds, we're triggering our yo-yo 3 times because our bird is triggering 3 times. We're also triggering our weight 6 times if we're at max health because our bird is healing us 3 times, and that's also triggering our vineyard 3 times. So 6 times we're getting healed. If we're already at full health, then our weights will fully activate and then some every time the bird triggers. So this is our sort of second mode. If the enemy is moving too slowly, or if the enemy is close to that 1,000 damage per attack barrier, then our bird is just pushing us over the edge, right? The enemy must be this tall to ride, like the 1,000 damage benchmark. That was just for 4 of our items. It wasn't including our weight or our bird. And that pushes us over the edge. That pushes us to the point where we just basically cannot be beaten. This build is insanely strong, but like I said, a little bit hard to replicate because you do have to find a very close version of this build or approximation of this build. Fortunately, there aren't too many items you need to find, right? You need to find a beehive, but that gives you the bee. So that's 2 items done in 1. We are using a large item in the vineyard, but that's the most replaceable item. You can grab a fort, you can grab a land scraper. You don't actually need the yo-yo, although this does push it over the edge. This pushes it to the double activation, but you can just run this with the bee and run more defensive items or more utility items instead. You don't absolutely have to run that yo-yo. And then a bird, of course. The bird could be anything here, but I think the bird is probably the strongest version. Again, any sort of utility you can throw in there, or even if you just can't find the bird, you can do poor man's bird. You can run bandages. You can run the bonsai tree thing. Absolutely anything can work there. The build has a lot of different ways it can be played, but you're realistically aiming for this Exodia version. Alright, on to some skills, and man, did we find the perfect one. Augmented weaponry. When you sell a small item, a weapon gains 2 damage. Well, you get this from the Tent PvE encounter. Tent City Mayor, that's his name. You get this from Tent City Mayor. You can find him on like day 2, 3. You're almost always the medium level encounter. And he has, I believe, 4 items and 2 skills. And his 2 skills are augmented weaponry and augmented defense or shielding. They do the same thing, but one's for damage, one's for shielding. When you sell a small item, a weapon gains 2 damage. We used this, and we picked up a vending machine, and we picked up a cash register. So at the beginning of every day, we generated 6 small tokens, which all gave us things, right? It gave us gold and health. I then visited so many of the chocolate bar events and generated so many chocolate bar tokens. I went to so many gumball events and generated so many gumball tokens. Because so let's take gumball as an example, right? If I go to gumball machine, I pay 10 gold to get one of each of or like 10 of the gumballs, right? That's going to give me crit chance, max health, shielding, which I don't care for, and damage. In itself, that's okay. But then I'm selling 10 tokens, which means I'm gaining 20 damage across my weapons. And I made sure I only ever had these two weapons, my bee and my yo-yo, in my entire inventory. So every time I sold a small item, usually a token, which is very low cost, they gained damage. You can see here, my yo-yo is at 234 damage. I didn't buff this with anything else, right? What you see on the end screen is its base damage before I go into a fight and my skills activate. This is what it does as base. This is insane. We just went hard on augmented weaponry. Now, there are absolutely other ways of playing this game. We happened to luck into a bit of an Exodia build, so I could spend a lot of time just generating tokens and empowering my items. Usually you'll have to spend more time going to people like Mittel or the healing vendor to try and find the right items. Mittel especially for weights and beehive. But because we lucked into the right items, I could really juice up my weapons of augmented weaponry. So that's one way you can do it. We also had right-handed, similar idea rather, buffing just our rightmost damage item, right? It's pretty strong early. And then right at the end, we also got strong arm. Your weapons have damage equal to triple your income. And by that point, we had 11 income. We're a Pygmalion. We get income on level up. So that meant we were doing even more damage again. But there are much better skills you could picking up right here, right? You could get the gain damage equal to your gold, right? Pygmalion usually has a ton of gold. I could have hoarded gold and had tons and tons more damage on my weapons. There are a lot of skills to look out for that increase your weapon damage. We also have the small arms one, the one that increases damage of small weapons. That was only a bronze tier though, but you could increase the tier of that one. As I said before, if you have a shielded vineyard, or if you went with fort or landscraper, you can go for sharp corners. Instantly, your bee and your yo-yo are doing a bajillion damage, right? There are so many different skills you can run. You just need to run skills that somehow buff your damage, right? Because your tankiness should be covered, and you just want to be able to outrun the enemy and churn through their health. So, that is the build. I'm sure you'll see a lot of it. I hope you run it sparingly and don't ruin the ladder by only running this, because I think it is probably by far the strongest build right now. If for more builds, guides, and news, you know what to do.